based off of the analysis that you've provided on all the news articles, it appears this is a distraction from last week's conversation, obviously leading to the address to joint session of Congress. That speech was lauded. We thought it was a great performance. But last night, CNN actually said one of the reasons why President Trump was basically frustrated was because his communication team did not coordinate the themes and conversation with Attorney General when he actually recused himself from investigating the potential issues connecting to Russia. So at the end of the day, I think that kind of spilled over to those tweets, because if you look at the timeline for the tweets, it was really early in the morning.
Yeah,
so if he was angry the previous night and he had a lot in his mind, obviously, I don't know where this story came up about the wiretaps, but I think it was just a distraction.
Well, Joe, on your point, the New York Times agrees with you on that. They say that Trump was incensed over Sessions' decision to recuse himself from the Russia probe after the Washington Post reported Sessions had met twice with the Russian ambassador. They write that in the Oval Office on Friday morning, Trump fumed at his senior staff about the Sessions situation and told them that he disagreed with the Attorney General's move, according to senior White House officials who were not authorized to speak publicly. Thanks for all your calls and comments on that and more. Post your thoughts at facebook.com. We move on here on Washington Journal. Coming up next, we're going to hear from the Concord Coalition's Robert Bixby and former Budget Committee staffer Stan Collender, who writes on budget and fiscal issues for Forbes. They examined President Trump's initial 2018 budget outline released last week. And later on, a look at new technology. MIT Technology Review Editor-in-Chief Jason Ponton discusses the annual list of 10 breakthrough technologies, some pretty cool stuff, and their extended impact. But first up, this week on C-SPAN's Newsmakers, we interview Nan Aaron, the president of the Alliance for Justice. She talks about why liberals are fighting to defeat President Trump's Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch. Senate hearings on that begin, by the way, March 20th.
We are in this to win. I think we will win. Number two, there's no lock on this seat to find a Scalia clone as Neil Gorsuch has been described. As I recall, that seat should have been filled by Merrick Garland, a very moderate, stellar candidate for the Supreme Court that enjoyed support from both Democrats and Republicans. In fact, it was Orrin Hatch, Republican senator from Utah, that called President Obama after the seat became vacant by Justice Scalia's death and recommended Merrick Garland. So I don't necessarily see this as the Scalia seat. And number three, this is the real fight. This is the most important fight, and we should not be looking down the road at who might vacate their seat. This is the seat. This is the fight at the moment. Neil Gorsuch is not the right judge for this seat, given his background. And, you know, we've only talked about his record. What we haven't talked about really is the hearing itself. He's not being considered for just a cabinet appointment lasting a few years, but he's been considered for a lifetime appointment, and therefore the bar will have to be much higher than it was set for a cabinet official. He's going to have to answer questions. He's going to have to tell the committee perhaps how he might have ruled on some of these cases. And I also think the bar will be set a lot higher because of what happened with Jeff Sessions, because those hearings were very short, very superficial, and I think now people realize that we're not just considering a nominee for Attorney General, but one for the highest court in the land.
Newsmakers, today at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN and C-SPAN Radio.
Tonight on Afterwards, journalist Sophia Nelson on her latest book, E Pluribus One, Reclaiming Our Founders' Vision for a United America. She's interviewed by Michael Steele, former chair of the RNC.
Where does unity come into play, and how does this book provide prescriptions for turning that important corner to recognize how important unity is?
This book is a refresher of civics, but I wrote it in a way, as you know, my Sophia way of, we need a little help. We're a little messed up. Right. America is a great country, but we're a little bit confused right now about who we are and what we want. And I think that's what we're wrestling with, Michael. So this unity piece, we have to break this down, because the problem that you saw in the last election is that half the country literally feels one way and another half of the country feels another.
Tonight at 9 Eastern on Afterwards. Washington Journal continues.
Well, the budget is on the way from President Trump and the new administration, the budget for fiscal year 2018. And here to talk about that, we're joined by Bob Bixby from the Concord Coalition, executive director of that organization, and Stan Collender, contributor for Forbes magazine. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us this morning. I just want to show a chart to start off with, looking at the perspective of where money goes in the federal budget, so our viewers, our listeners can see this is federal spending in 2017, and the amount of mandatory spending in terms of trillions of dollars is $2.7 trillion. So the non-discretionary, non-defense, defense and non-defense discretionary, and interest on the debt, a smaller fraction of that, but still, obviously, a big part of what the president and the Congress decide. The president came out on his address to a joint session on Tuesday night and gave us kind of an outline of where things stand. What did you hear from President Trump? What do you think is missing from that budget so far?
Well, I think he signaled a big fight over spending priorities, but not necessarily on the amount of spending. And it overlooked the fast-growing mandatory program. So all the focus was on the discretionary part of the budget, which is about 30%, as you pointed out. And so as we look at the budget going forward, it's really the growth of the mandatory spending programs that is the most problematic. So we need to turn some attention to that.
Stan Collender, he called for a large increase in defense spending, some $54 billion?
$54 billion. We don't know over what period of time, or whether it's actual spending this year or just budget authority, what we call that, is the permission to spend that will result in additional dollars over the years. What I really heard in this speech, though, was that there's a big fight going to be brewing between congressional Republicans and the president. The president didn't talk, as Bob just said, about the mandatory programs. Yeah. Whereas we know that Paul Ryan and some of the others on the Hill said the Freedom Caucus really want to go after some of those programs. That's going to put a lot of Republican representatives in a very, very difficult position. If you thought some of the town hall problems they had in the past were going to be difficult, wait till you see what happens when Medicare and Social Security start being the issues.
So it's really within the GOP conference, the House GOP conference itself, and less so between Speaker Ryan and President Trump.
Well, it's also between House Republicans and Senate Republicans. There have been, and there will continue to be, some huge differences. But I've got to believe that the House Republicans, in particular, many of them, are going to be fighting pretty seriously with each other and fighting with their constituents who don't like some of the things they're already doing and are going to continue not to like it. And when they get to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, Medicaid and Medicare in particular, it's going to be a huge problem.
We are welcoming your comments and calls at 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, and all others 202-748-8002. Send us a tweet at C-SPAN WJ. Stan Collender and Robert Bixby with us here to talk about the budget. What are we talking about in terms of when we will actually see a budget from the Trump administration?
We'll see a so-called skinny budget, some sort of an outline in a couple of weeks. March 16th, I think, is the target date for that. That won't be much more than just a bare skeleton. I think a more detailed budget that we traditionally see will come out sometime later in the year, maybe June, maybe May or something like that. There's no real fixed deadline on that. Congress will go ahead and try to pass a budget resolution at some time before that. And I just, picking up on Stan's comment there, I think that one of the problems, with what we've seen so far from the White House is that if you're just trying to pay for new initiatives. If you're going to pay for the new defense spending by cutting other spending, that's fine, but it still leaves the budget in an unsustainable track. So the so-called baseline, what the president's budget is going to have to deal with is rising deficits over the next 10 years, another almost $9.5 trillion. So what we didn't hear so far is a plan to deal with that.
And just to pick up on that, Bob's exactly right. That is, there doesn't seem to be a long-term plan or any plan for dealing with the debt or the deficit. In 2011, the U.S. Credit rating was downgraded because, in part, Standard & Poor's said there was no plan to deal with the medium to long-term deficit. The debt's $4 trillion higher now, and there's now no plan, again, it looks like. So I'm expecting that there's going to be serious consideration for another downgrade of U.S. debt over this fiscal policy.
Well, he has a decision coming up. The Congress has a role coming up shortly. There's a debt ceiling deadline coming up here in a month or so? Or?
March 15th.
Yeah.
The suspension of the debt ceiling expires. That means the debt ceiling goes back into place, but it looks like it won't be much of a problem until the fall. That's when the rubber's going to hit the road. If the debt ceiling's not raised, and Mick Mulvaney, the OMB director, the Trump OMB director, is against raising or has been against raising the debt ceiling, we could have a huge fight in the fall over this one issue alone. And it could end up doing everything from a potential default to a possible government shutdown.
Remind us of the obstacle that faces President Trump on defense spending and other issues, the sequester. How does that play into this, and how will it be removed?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I actually had a column that came out a couple of weeks ago about exactly that. President Trump, when he made the speech to Congress this past week, said he wanted to increase defense spending by $54 billion, and he wanted to reduce domestic spending by the same amount to pay for it. Now, he backed off a little bit on that the next day, but according to the law, you can't do that. That is, if you spend...
According to the current law, the sequester law.
Right. Well, it's not. It's the Budget Control Act.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. That is, if you spend more than the cap in defense or military spending, you're supposed to have Congress and the President are supposed to raise the cap. If they don't do that, there's supposed to be an automatic across-the-board cut, as you suggested. It's called a sequester. I have doubts, very serious doubts, about whether this administration would actually implement that law. That is, that the President would simply order the OMB director not to impose the sequester, which would be a violation of the law.
And, I think that that brings up this point about what the President has been talking about with the discretionary programs, the appropriations, are, as Stan said, governed by this budget cap law, which means that you're going to have to get Democratic votes to do anything.
Yeah.
And the kind of proposals that he's, floated so far would not pass. They would have trouble passing Republicans.
You're talking about the stories that are out of EPA being cut by 20%.
Correct. All of the higher. See, what they've done before when they've adjusted the caps, they've had bipartisan agreements, is that they've decided to increase both defense and non-defense by similar amounts. If you try to increase defense by a whole lot and cut the non-defense programs by a whole lot, probably those bills would not pass, and Democrats could filibuster the appropriations bills. So you're really looking at not only a debt ceiling crisis, but another shutdown over appropriations, possibly in the fall.
We have calls awaiting. Let's go to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and hear from Sylvia. For Stan Collender and Robert Bixby. Good morning, Sylvia. Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much, C-SPAN, for taking my call this morning. I have a question for Mr. Robert Bixby and also a question for Stan Collender. I'm a military mom, single-parent mother of 4. And my daddy is a Purple Heart Korean War vet. And I'd like to hear about from the Trump administration about what type of budget is there going to be for more military benefits in the area where they receive their benefits monthly, and how is he going to help police officers around the United States, IMSA, and firefighters around the United States do their jobs more, have the tools that they need to do their jobs more efficient, and with the mayors and governors and what have you together on this to have more of a budget for them, more federal government funds for them both, for all parties.
Okay, Sylvia, I'll let you go there as you two consider some of the reflections of what she asked. I did want to play President Trump from Tuesday night, and in particular, your question about the military. Here's President Trump's proposal from Tuesday night.
In Congress, a budget that rebuilds the military, eliminates the defense sequester, and calls for one of the largest increases in national defense spending in American history. My budget will also increase funding for our veterans. Our veterans have delivered for this nation, and now we must deliver for them. The challenges we face as a nation are great, but our people are even greater. And none are greater or braver than those who fight for America in uniform.
Robert Bixby and Stan Collender, big applause for ending the defense sequester.
It's a guaranteed applause line, but to get to the question that we were asked, Bob, maybe you know better than I do, but I suspect that most of those dollars that the president's proposing for defense is going to go for procurement, that is, for buying weapon systems and operations, rather than operations and maintenance, and rather than additional military benefits. In addition, the cutbacks on the domestic side to pay for some of the defense increases the president's talking about are almost certainly going to hit state and local government funding, which will hit first responders and those types of things that are paid for with those dollars.
That was a point that I was going to make in response to our caller, is that certainly when you get into the helping state and local law enforcement and that sort of thing, if you're really cutting the domestic discretionary spending, that's where that comes from. Now, it doesn't mean that, Congress is going to make the decisions, because whatever the president puts up as advisory, Congress makes the decisions on the appropriations bills. But yeah, if you're going to be severely pinching the domestic discretionary budget, it could have an effect on state and local grants for law enforcement.
And just a reminder, some top-line numbers from CNN here and Reuters on what the president's proposed so far. What we know, boosting defense spending by $54 billion, nearly a 10% jump to $603 billion, decreasing non-defense discretionary spending, domestic programs to $462 billion. Defense increase would be paid for by reducing, as we've been talking about, that domestic spending, and the president saying no cuts to entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare. Let's hear from Anthony in Sierra Vista, Arizona. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm going to speak real quickly about this, and it's about the budget. But these items that I'm going to address all affect the budget. And the major thing right now for the country seems to be give him time, give President Trump time. And I'd like to add two words, time for what? Because he has to deal with these things. Time served with the penal system, mental institutions with our health. These are all budget items. Life, quality of life, obey our education system.
I'll let you go, Anthony. You're breaking up on us. Sorry about that a little bit. We'll go to Dan in Dayton, Ohio, Republican line. Go ahead, Dan.
Hello?
You're on the air. Go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call. I just want to make a comment about the amount of money that is being sent out of the United States to foreign governments. Hello? What?
You're on the air. We're listening.
Okay. Those foreign governments, all the ones that we send our money to that can afford some of their own security and other measures. And I would like to ask these gentlemen to address that issue, including money that may be being sent to terrorist organizations or different countries that have terrorist organizations. I believe that Trump will cut some of that, and that will help our budget. So if these gentlemen would address that issue, I would appreciate it, and I'm going to hang up and hear the response. Thank you.
Foreign aid.
Yeah, well, I'll be happy to take a first shot at it.
Sure,
but it is a myth that foreign aid is the big problem in the budget. It is something that's been around for a while. The average American thinks that 25% or more of the federal budget goes for foreign aid. The answer is it's about 1% or even a little bit less. Yes, we do send some money overseas, but it's a tiny part of the budget, and if you could eliminate it entirely, you'd still have a huge deficit in national debt. In addition, keep in mind that a lot of what we call foreign aid is actually money that's spent here. It's spent on tractors and farm equipment. It's spent on defense goods and services that we then send those overseas. So we're talking about having an impact on American jobs as well as having a small, almost a tiny impact on the budget.
On that issue, Nicholas Burns, former Undersecretary of State, writing about the State Department's budget in a piece over the weekend, piece yesterday in the Washington Post. Trump needs diplomats as well as soldiers. He writes that the White House this week signaled it will seek a massive $20 billion reduction for state and the Agency for International Development out of a budget of over $50 billion, the highest proportional cuts proposed for any department. If enacted, this proposal would cripple the department's career, foreign, and civil service when we need them most. It would also endanger Trump's ability to confront most complex national security agenda in decades, according to Nicholas Burns.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, this is one of the consequences that is going to be faced if you're trying to cut the non-defense programs that severely. I think in the State Department there'll be a lot of pushback on this because the United States does have a very robust role around the world, and it's not cheap to do that. So it's not simply waste, fraud, and abuse. You also find a lot of support in the Defense Department for State Department programs because they do work hand in glove around the nation. If you have, around the world. If you have, for example, a military operation, very often after that, the State Department will go in and try to work with the country involved in building up the economy of the, not just the economy, but I mean the security of the country that we're involved in. So, you know, these things work together, and it's difficult to cut one severely and not have an effect on the other.
The Concord Coalition, what's your basic approach to the economy and the budget? Tell us about your organization.
Well, we have always argued for a balanced budget. You don't necessarily need one every year, but you should try to get a program that's sustainable over the long term. And we've tried to point out that our current fiscal policy is not sustainable. Most of the increase in spending that's projected over the coming decades is from the mandatory programs like Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid because of the aging of the population and healthcare cost. And it's the structural difference between that growing spending and our revenues that don't grow by as much that lead to the projected deficits. So the discretionary programs that we spend a lot of time talking about, they're important, and we should debate them, and we should try to do them as efficiently as possible. But that's not where the real spending growth is going, and those aren't the programs that are driving the long-term debt problem.
On the item of interest on the debt, we have a question from Dee Dee who asks that with interest rates rising, do you expect total gross interest on the debt to reach $1 trillion? I think in the latest it is $270 billion. Is this a problem facing us?
Yeah, well, interest, it's a really good question, and it's a very astute question. Interest on the national debt will be the fastest growing portion of the budget going forward for two reasons. One, as Dee Dee mentioned, interest rates are going up, and second, because the principal, the amount we borrowed, keeps going up pretty substantially. In fact, my back-of-the-envelope estimate is that if President Trump gets everything he wants, we're looking at an annual increase in the deficit of about $1 trillion.
How do we wind up repaying the national debt? How does people?
Well, we don't really need to do that. What we do need to do is just make sure that we can afford the debt that we have. Yeah. And when the debt is growing faster than the economy, it's ultimately unsustainable because you couldn't borrow enough money to keep paying it. So really, before we even think about trying to repay, I think what we need to do is try to get the debt to GDP ratio stable so it's not growing faster than the economy and we're on a sustainable course.
But let's go back to something we talked about just a little while ago. If on the one hand interest rates are going up because of monetary policy and because that's what the Fed thinks is correct, and on the other hand, interest rates are going up because we're downgraded in our credit rating, then interest on the national debt is going to go up even faster than it would have otherwise. Keep in mind that interest on the debt it will push everything else out of the way. It has to be paid first. And it means that the budget situation will get that much worse than it otherwise would have been. It's a potentially difficult situation that it doesn't look like anyone is paying attention to within the Trump administration right now.
You see a headline on your Forbes piece this morning that's saying 5 possible shocks to the economy coming from Washington. Is that one of them?
That's one of them. That's the one that could happen in the fall. Another one could be OMB Director Mick Mulvaney resigning because what he wants to do or how he wants to do it is not accepted by the Trump administration, and a lot of what he wants to do, or a lot of the positions he's taken in the past are different than what President Trump wants to do. That will free up the Freedom Caucus to oppose much of what the president wants. I mean, there are 5 of them on Forbes this morning, but there are some potential real time bombs out there that could blow up the economic situation.
Let's see if we can touch on a few of them. Go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, in interest, remember, that happens because of the debt that's borrowed and the interest rate that's owed on it. So it's not like something Congress can go in and change and say, well, let's see, we're going to spend less on interest this year. I mean, it's what they're stuck with.
Let's hear from Shreveport, Louisiana. Good morning to Homer, Democrats line.
Yes, I'm on your loyal listeners every day. But my main concern is why we consider our Social Security money, which we are paid in every week when we work, why is that a part of the budget? It look like if we pay that separate, that ought to be kept separate. Your thoughts?
Social Security is untouchable.
Politically, it's untouchable, but we will need to touch it at some point because right now the payroll tax that we do all pay is not bringing in enough money to pay the benefits. And that gap will get larger as the baby boom generation continues on in their retirement years. So something is going to have to be done to either adjust future benefits or raise taxes, raise the payroll tax to close that gap. So we can't just leave the program. Of course, is a federal program. The taxes go into the Treasury, and the benefits are paid out of the Treasury. And it's a very important program. But right now, it is facing a shortfall that's going to have to be addressed sooner or later by the Congress.
And just for information, Social Security was added to the budget. It used to be separate, as you suggested it should be. It was added to the budget in 1969. It was an initiative by Lyndon Johnson initially. That was actually implemented by Richard Nixon. And ever since then, we've had exactly the same question. Bob's exactly right, but I want to put it in a slightly different way. We're going to have to face a question of whether we're going to keep the commitment we made to seniors, or whether we're going to have to pull back on it, saying that we were too generous too early and we can't afford it any longer. Think of the politics of this. As America ages, more people will be either on Social Security or expect to get it, and it'll become increasingly difficult to cut benefits under those circumstances. So it won't just be benefit reductions that are going to be discussed. It'll be other ways of paying for it.
And a visual representation from Robert Bixby's Concord Coalition, the chart, the sources of growth in federal spending. As Stan Collender mentioned, the interest on the debt, they're big in yellow, but also Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, CHIP, and exchange subsidies. Are veterans' benefits included in this growth as well?
They would be in the other category, the one that's going down.
That's going down.
Yeah, I mean that's not a major part of the budget, and it's not growing faster than the economy.
And it won't grow in the aftermath of Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, I mean it'll grow in dollar terms,
right?
But it's not like a big major driver.
Here's Brecksville, Ohio. Dave, welcome on the Independent line.
Well, top of the morning to you.
Good morning.
I would just like to address something about the defense budget that Trump wants to increase. The Pentagon, back in January 22nd of 2015, commissioned a study to check into waste in the military. They came up with a $125 billion savings over 5 years. And the name of the commission was for transforming the DoD core business process and revolutionary change. And what they basically did was stated that you've got contractors that get paid for not doing their full job, like over in Iraq with Halliburton and the burn pits. And it basically also stated that 1,014,000 civilians, contractors, and military people filled back office jobs to support the smallest military force that we have had since World War II of $1.3 million, 1.3 million troops, active troops. Now, to me, Trump is going after waste and fraud and all of the other domestic programs. I think he should start with the military.
Okay, Dave, we'll get some thoughts from Stan Collender.
Well, you raise a variety of interesting questions. First of all, I'm going to add one myself. We don't know where the $54 billion number came from. Maybe we'll get some more details when the skinny budget or any of the budgets come out, but right now we don't know where it is. Second, I've never quite understood why somebody can understand why an extra sandwich in a school lunch program is waste, but buying additional equipment that's never going to be used for the military is not waste. You're right. There should be at least a review of that to see whether the total $54 billion is necessary or whether there's some net amount, because some of the things we're already spending are not necessary any longer.
The Pentagon is a noted source of waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, the Government Accountability Office puts out very good reports every year about government agencies and places where you could trim spending, programs that are duplicative or wasteful, and they often cite the Pentagon as a place where the money isn't well accounted for. So I do think that any search for waste in the government should include certainly defense spending, but you have to remember that there's no line item in the budget for waste, fraud, and abuse.
Yeah. Back to calls. We got a Tallapoosa, Georgia, Republican caller. Justin, welcome.
Yeah, I say the way to fix Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security is take it from the illegals because they didn't pay it in. They broke the law when they come over here illegally. And my sister had to wait 3 years when she got hurt. She had a bad stroke, and she had to wait a long time just to get her insurance. DFACS kept denying her, and if it wasn't for Georgia Legal Aid, she wouldn't have that insurance neither. And I'd like to know why American people that have strokes and AIDS and cancer has to wait that long when an illegal comes over here and they got insurance right off the bat.
Well, let's tie this into the broader goal of the Trump administration, to repeal and replace Obamacare and the potential costs involved in doing that. Try to tie that into the budget he's proposing or will propose for 2018.
Well, the Affordable Care Act, repeal, replace, rename, repair, whatever it's going to be, is still very, very much up in the air. But the big question is, can you really do what the president said, which is, can you really say that no one's going to lose his or her insurance or his or her benefits, prior existing conditions, those types of things, and pay less for it and get better care? And the answer is almost certainly no. So what kind of commitment are we making here? It's almost certainly what Congress is finding is that people don't want to lose these benefits. I'm someone with a prior existing condition. I'm a cancer survivor. And I'm deathly afraid of what's going to happen under these circumstances. So what do we do here with the budget situation that is not quite desperate, but is getting difficult or beyond that? And yet we're in a medical situation where we're saying basically we can't afford to provide everybody the benefits that we think they want. It's not surprising the president said last week no one really understood how difficult health care is.
I think this is really one of the key issues facing the Congress and the budget. It hangs over everything because if we're talking about repealing and replacing, or however we're going to do it, they need to do it at the same time. You can't just repeal Obamacare and then have nothing to take its place. If you repeal it and then try to develop something over time to replace it, I think it would probably turn into a mess, because you'd be pumping money. You'd be trying to pump money into a system that had been repealed to make sure nobody lost health insurance until you had the new system. And for lots of reasons, I think that would get even more expensive. So I think that if they're going to do something on this, have a replacement plan in place. But it really gets into a couple of issues hanging over the rest of the budget: Medicare, Medicaid, and taxes. Obamacare raised taxes to pay for the program. So one of the issues is, what do you do with the taxes that were raised in Obamacare? That affects the tax reform debate. What do you do about the Medicare changes that were made in Obamacare? That affects Medicare's debate. And Medicaid is probably the biggest part of all there, because a big part of Obamacare was the expansion of Medicaid. So you've got a lot of states that are now wondering, well, if that is repealed, what do we do about our Medicaid expansion? So you've got governors, Republicans and Democrats alike, wondering what happens. So really that ought to be front and center, the first thing that they resolve.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, we've already talked about how domestic discretionary spending is planning to go down. Let's remember that things like the National Institute of Health and National Cancer Institute, the Center for Disease Control, are all in that category. So you know,
in the discretionary
category. So we don't yet know how they're going to be affected, but there have been some great strides that have helped everybody who's watching today, from CDC and NCI and those types of things. And you want those to continue. It's not just a question of providing the benefits, it's the research that will make it possible for people to survive over years. And that's also in question at the moment.
Here's Elaine in Jacksonville, Florida, for Stan Collender and Robert Bixby. Good morning, Elaine.
Yes, good morning. I'm calling about the Social Security part. It looks like every time you turn around, they want to do something about Social Security. But the thing about it is, people pay into Social Security, and Social Security is earned to the people. And another thing, if the rich start paying their share part in taxes and stuff, I think it should be looking like that, because it's most of the middle class and the poor paying the majority of the taxes. Thank you.
Elaine, on taxes, we haven't touched on that yet. The president, what did he lay out the other night? And his timeline, according to his Treasury Secretary, they want to get it done by August.
Unrealistic, to say the least. Let's remember in 1986, when the last time we had a major tax reform, it took 2 years. 2 years just to draft the legislation, and then another year to draft the transition rules from the old system to the new system. And that was before tweeting. That was before social media. That was before Rush Limbaugh or Rachel Maddow or anybody. I mean, the communications will be completely different. In the middle of a conference committee behind closed doors on tax reform these years, there'll be members of Congress tweeting out what they're talking about, and will make the situation much more difficult. I'm guessing it's not even going to happen this year at all, that it may happen in 2008. Tax reform, corporate tax reform. Individual tax reform could take even longer.
What does President Trump want to get done?
Well, he wants to lower taxes for corporations and for individuals. And you know how that gets done. There were proposals on the campaign trail, but it seems like there's kind of a wide-ranging review working with the Congress and actually what's going to happen. I agree with Stan. I think it's not going to happen anytime soon because it's very complicated. There are very different ideas of what tax reform means, and there are winners and losers in any tax reform debate, and so it's not an easy, it's not a slam dunk. What I am afraid of is that a default mechanism would just be to enact some tax cuts without really much reform involved, and right now, with the budget situation as it is, and the economy doing okay, not robust, but okay, This doesn't seem like the best time for a big tax cut. That's certainly one that's not paid for.
Go ahead, Steve.
And the president said it would be paid for using a variety of the gimmicks that, or techniques, let's put it that way, that happened during the Reagan administration. We had a rosy economic scenario that is faster economic growth than most economists think is possible. The magic asterisk, where it projects future cuts without specifying what they are. Dynamic scoring to an extent that we haven't done before. And Bob is right. What we could end up with is a tax cut that's really not paid for, in spite of what the president wants. I mean, he's saying he wanted to use the pay-fors on the domestic side of the budget to pay for the increase in defense. So where does that leave you in terms of tax cuts and paying for it under those circumstances?
Think about the magnitude of what was being proposed on the campaign trail. Depending on how you score it, people estimated the tax cut that Trump was proposing is anywhere from $4 trillion to $7 or $8 trillion over 10 years. We've already got about a $9.5 trillion deficit projected for that time. So those estimates even included dynamic feedback, positive feedback to the economy. That's a lot bigger even than the defense increase than we're talking about, and bigger than I think you could offset with realistic spending cuts.
And reflecting some of your comments earlier about the political difficulty of getting the entitlements cut for some members in Congress facing that. A tweet from Larry who says that the president can't lower taxes for the corporation of the 1% and then talk about cutting entitlements.
Well, he can. He probably will. But, all of the questions are interesting, both from the Republican and the Democrat and the independent line this morning. It shows a real concern and a certain level of anger about the things being discussed, equal to some of the anger that's happened on the Affordable Care Act repeal and replace so far. I suspect this is going to result in a steady series of these kind of town hall interactions or lack of interactions that we're going to see through the rest of the year. I mean, this is not a level of political activism that's going to go down because the issues are too difficult, nor should they. Everybody who's calling in should make sure that their members of Congress hear what they're saying, not just us.
And that's a good thing. I mean, I get excited when people get excited about the budget. I mean, if people are because the budget really it's not boring numbers. They affect everyday Americans and their everyday lives, and people should take an interest.
And we've got about 20 more minutes to talk in budget with Robert Bixby of the Concord Coalition and guest columnist for Forbes, Stan Collender, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, Independents and others, 202-748-8002. Let's hear from Dave in New Lenox, Illinois. Go ahead, Dave.
Hi, I have a question about, are there any reforms in sight for the Social Security disability program? Here in Illinois, there's one case here where a congressman went to prison. He got out of prison and he signed up for Social Security disability because of depression. And he now gets $138,000 a year, tax-free. This is just one case. It goes on all the time. Our TV's flooded with commercials.
And Dave, did you say that was a former congressman?
Yeah, Jesse Jackson Jr. He went to prison for stealing money from his campaign. And now they can also, after they draw Social Security disability, they can also go out and get government jobs on top of it. There's one case where a man, he's the mayor of, he draws $125,000 a year, and then he gets a job in the school district making another $125,000 a year.
We haven't touched on that yet, Social Security disability reform of Social Security at all much.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can comment that knowledgeably about that in particular, but this is the kind of things that Congress tends not to look at. They look at bigger pictures most of the time. Bob, are you aware of anything like this?
I think that what I know about the disability program is that it often has it's in bigger financial problems than the Social Security retirement system. The trust fund for disability is projected to go bust in 2023, I think. So Congress is going to have to look at some reforms to that system. I'm not aware of the individual case that the caller mentioned, but
and just another piece of that non-discretionary spending that Congress faces each year. And your Congress Coalition chart points out the growth from 2016 projecting out to 2046, the percentage of GDP right now just over 5%, looking out to 2046 at 8%. How impactful is that on things like interest rates and business growth 30 years down the road?
Your chart.
It depends on what else is going on. I mean, if we're on a sustainable track, it's not as consequential. I mean, you can afford that. If what's happening is that it's all deficit finance, that would have a very devastating effect on the economy and on the federal budget.
In the short term, what has the Trump administration said is their target range for economic growth in the coming year or so?
Well, we've heard a couple of different things, several different things actually. During the campaign, during one of the debates, President Trump, then candidate Trump, said he thought 4% was reasonable, and even that he might be able to exceed that. A couple of weeks ago, there was a leak coming out of the White House, or even intentional or otherwise, that they were looking at something between 3.4 and 3.8% growth, which most economists thought was very, very high given where monetary policy and interest rates were going.
Right.
They seem to have pulled back on that. They're now talking about growth in the high 2%, maybe 3% range, which wouldn't be enough to offset any of the other things they're talking about.
And if the Fed, as has been reported, may increase rates again in their next meeting, is that a further hindrance on growth? Or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what you've got here would be monetary policy and fiscal policy. That is the budget and interest rates at war with each other, with the Fed saying that the economy is growing too fast and the president saying, I want to get the economy to grow faster. That almost certainly means higher interest rates, not just for the government, but for anyone trying to get a student loan, a car loan, a home mortgage.
Here's Oswego, New York. Gene, good morning. Democrats line.
Hello, good morning. I'm a 90-year-old veteran of World War II and the Korean War, and I worked about 35 years in the military-industrial complex thing. And my observations on the Pentagon is a big sandbox where half the programs that they start never get canceled, and they spend a ton of money just canceling programs. And one other quick comment, 1% thing that with all the time to defend a portion of the budget. Budget's made up of hundreds of different little things that you could defend one piece at a time by thousands of people that do that. It's still, at 1% of the budget is still what, $30-40 billion? Thank you.
Well, first of all, you said you're a World War II veteran, so let me say to you what I hope other people say to you. Thank you for your service. My dad was a World War II veteran, and I never got a chance to say that to him. You've got to remember a lot in the Pentagon. A lot of the programs are development programs. That is, they're designed because the science doesn't exist yet, the technology doesn't exist yet. They're trying to see if they can make things work. Could it be done, as Bob suggested earlier, a little bit more efficiently and effectively? Yes, absolutely. And in an organization that size, you would expect it. But not all of the development programs and the things that are dropped because they don't work are necessarily waste or fraudulent. They're actually designed to move the needle forward in terms of what we understand and how the world works.
Janine, next up in Columbia, Missouri, Republican line. Good morning, Janine.
Good morning. Speaking of budget, I kind of got a little frantic whenever the gentleman said his sister had to wait 3 years and about the immigration. And my thoughts is in the budget, whenever you have American citizens who are rooted here and who have invested in Social Security, disability, or whatever, they should be first in line for those benefits. They should never have to wait. And people who are coming into this country, why not reverse that? We could fix our budget if we simply put the American tax-paying citizens first. I'm not saying not help anyone else, but make American citizens first priority versus people who are coming in the country and they're getting it right off the bat when we have to struggle. Why should we struggle for something we have already paid for? If you fix the budget with that, putting the American tax-paying citizens first, I'm sure that our budget could be straightened out. I am also an African-American. I voted for Mr. Trump. I don't care what anyone says about that man. Everyone talks about politicians lying. At least he's up front and he's saying what he feels. He really means what he says. He could care less what you think. On the other hand, you have other people who lie, cheat, and steal, and they hide it. I admire, and that's why I voted for Mr. Trump. One, he wants to bring American values back. we don't know how he's going to do it, and everybody's just blasting this poor guy, and they're not giving him a chance. Give this man a chance. I believe that he's going to bring it back around. Maybe everything doesn't look so up front, and maybe they don't like his technique of doing things, but I believe he's going to get it done.
All right, Janine, any thoughts?
Well, I don't think that we could solve our budget problems by the way you suggested, because illegal undocumented workers, illegal immigrants, whatever, don't collect Social Security and don't qualify for Medicare. Medicaid, I think there may be some cost there with compensated to the states that are required to, if somebody shows up to an emergency room. But the magnitude, I mean, there may be a little bit of fraud, but not anywhere near as much. As a matter of fact, with Social Security, the Social Security actuaries, when they put out the trustees report every year, report that Social Security actually benefits from illegal immigration. Now, they're not promoting it. We're not saying that's a good thing. It's just people, undocumented workers, sometimes pay into the system that they will never get anything out of. So it's a small net plus. Not that that's a big deal. But I'm just saying that we have to be realistic about the types of savings that could be a gain from tightening up on immigration.
Stan Collender wanted to go back to the budget itself, and you worked on Capitol Hill and
a long time ago.
One of the budget committees.
I had hair then.
The House, the House has a new Budget Committee chair, Diane Black, taking,
right.
And this year will be obviously different from last year, where a budget really never got started in the House so much. What's the biggest challenge she faces as a new budget chair?
Well, it didn't just new budget didn't get started. It just didn't just get started in the House. It didn't get started at all in the Senate. In fact, I had a chance to testify in front of both committees last year about what they should do differently to get a budget done. And the answer the first answer was to commit to it. This year, the congressional Republicans are trying a very new strategy, never done before, with two budgets in the same year. They've already passed one in January. They're going to try to pass another one in May or June, depending upon when they actually get their act together and when the president submits his budget. It's going to be very difficult for Congress to follow the president's priorities because they're a little inconsistent. It's going to be very difficult for House Republicans to agree with Senate Republicans on something. And if they don't do that, then they're going to put the tax reform proposal in jeopardy for the rest of the year. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on a brand new House Budget Committee Chairman, Diane Black, as you suggested, to do things that have never been done before. It's going to be tension-filled through the rest of the year. Actually, I have a favor to ask. Can I mention my Twitter handle?
You can.
Oh, thank you.
I think we put it up on the screen,
too. I thought you never asked, but my Twitter handle is called @TheBudgetGuy.
@TheBudgetGuy. And I've seen a bunch of that on our Twitter stream.
Oh,
Not
great.
this one, but an interesting response to our previous caller. This is Ian, who tweets his take. I'm not upset with my money going to immigrants. I bet it's little. I'm upset with it going to greedy retired people. That's from Ian. We welcome your comments at C-SPAN WJ and @TheBudgetGuy.
Thank you.
For Stan Collender. Middletown, Ohio. Linda is on our independent line. Go ahead.
Good morning. I have a question. We heard a lot through the campaign about loopholes in the tax laws which allow the wealthy to actually get out of paying taxes when they did their return. Could you elaborate a little bit on some of those loopholes? And if we remove those loopholes, would that help the budget if those wealthy were actually?
I think that a very productive approach to tax reform would be to close or scale back or eliminate a lot of credits, deductions, exemptions, exclusions, special rates that would make the tax system a great deal more efficient. It would tend to be done on a progressive basis because upper income people do tend to benefit more from those so-called, you call them loopholes, some people call them tax expenditures because they're programs that they're tax breaks that mirror spending programs in a different form. So Yeah, I mean, I think that you could, as a way of raising revenue, a part of a budget, bill, that would be one way to go. Specifics, well, it's difficult.
Yeah, and let's keep in mind that there have been many attempts to do that before. The last big time was '86 with the Big Tax Reform Act, where they got rid of a lot of the special tax breaks, which were subsequently added back over the next 30 years.
Yeah.
And there have been proposals during the Obama administration, I suspect during the Trump administration they'll be coming as well, to do exactly the same thing, and they've routinely been rejected in large part by Congress. So if you're adamant about it, and it sounds like you are, you should be letting your representatives and senators know right today where you feel about this, that it would be a major change in the way we collect and collect taxes, and the impact on the budget would be substantial.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, what was required for that is for everybody to take a deep breath and say, would we rather have tax breaks or would we rather have lower rates? Because what you could do if you got rid of a lot of those tax breaks, which are very popular. I mean, sometimes like we're talking about the home mortgage interest deduction, for example, which is, right up there with Social Security in terms of untouchability. But if you were to take a deep breath and do that, then we could collect as much revenue or maybe even more with lower rates. And a lot of commissions that have studied this over the years have proposed just that sort of a reform. But as Stan said, it's very difficult because people want, nothing got into the tax code by accident. And so the forces that promote these things would continue to fight for them. And a lot of taxpayers like the breaks that they get.
Here's Alexandria, Minnesota. Lauren, Republican caller.
Yeah, as far as that Affordable Care Act, there was a doctor on TV that said we should get rid of it completely and don't replace it with anything. We'd all be better off. And I agree with him. It's a huge welfare program, and we got enough welfare in this country. Jobs, real shortage of truck driving jobs, and in my community, wherever I look, signs now hiring. There's a shortage of qualified workers. That's what's wrong in this country. Thank you.
Okay.
This is one where I'm going to disagree directly and specifically with you and with that doctor. 20 million more people got health insurance, maybe a little bit more than 20 million got health insurance who didn't have it before. And that not only helps them, but it helps me. It means that the emergency rooms aren't as crowded with people getting basic care. It means that people are working longer because they're healthier and paying more in taxes and therefore keeping the deficit down. And there's just a moral equivalent, a moral question here about what do we do for the folks who really need health care? I mean, what do we think about the people in the United States, Americans, who deserve and need it? As I said, I'm a cancer survivor. I'm worried about the fact that if ACA goes away, what happens to my ability to get health insurance going forward? What happens to women's ability to get to covered for their needs? This is one I couldn't disagree more. If we're going to replace it, if we're going to repeal and replace it, it has to at least maintain the same levels of coverage.
Let's hear from Wilmington, Delaware. A couple more calls here. This is Kwame in Wilmington. Welcome, Independent Line.
Thank you. I'm not really concerned about Trump's spending because I'm pretty sure it's going to be deficit unless Congress does something about it. I just have one comment on the question. From an abstract perspective, what exactly is wrong with simply saying, screw this, we're not going to pay the interest, we're just going to forfeit on the debt? And secondly, I'm kind of concerned about the cowardice that I see anyway from Congress in terms of actually trying to do something about Social Security. I mean, what exactly is so difficult in increasing what is being paid if you can somehow communicate to the taxpayer that in the long term they're going to benefit from it? It just seems to me that it's just political cowardice. And that's really what is constraining this country right now. Nobody wants to do anything. They simply want to talk about doing something and then simply stay in power.
Well, let's start with Stan Collender on his point of just not paying that interest. You talked a little bit about this earlier.
Yeah, I want Bob in on this one too. But look, in the entire history of the United States, we've never missed a payment on the national debt. So number one, if we were to stop paying the interest on the national debt, basically telling our creditors that you're out of luck, you bet on the wrong horse, whatever. The problem is the United States would have to go back into business the next day, would have to borrow from somebody else, and at what interest rate would people be willing to lend to the United States if we could unilaterally just write it off? Second, the biggest holder of U.S. debt and the biggest benefit of the interest on it is the Social Security Trust Fund. So essentially what the caller is suggesting is that we destroy the Social Security Trust Fund and basically tell a variety of senior citizens who are already getting benefits or those who are close to getting benefits that there's no money to pay them. So it would be